Hey guys, I am going live on Facebook and the old Instagram. Uh, Great, everything looks like it's running. I've got my mics on today, so if at any point you can't hear me, just send me a message. And if I'm kind of flip-flopping between the two screens, that's why. It's just because I'm on both. So I'm going to be doing a little series. I did a few blogs about this quite a while ago now. But I think it's kind of one of the most interesting things that I've sort of written about and talked about, and something that I go back to over and over again. And so this is the yamas and the niyamas. So don't worry if you've never heard those words before. If you've done yoga teacher training, or if you've done a really traditional style of practice, then you will have heard of the yamas and the niyamas. They're basically the do's and the don'ts of yoga practice. You talk a lot about this in your yoga teacher training. This is the philosophy side of yoga. Some of these ideas, principles are really, really old. And sometimes your teachers will talk about these things as well. And a lot of this is like layered in, and you don't even realize that these are the things that you're learning about. So today we're going to be looking at something called Ahimsa. Okay, so this essentially means non-violence, non-harming. Okay, so which most of us would think that we're non-violent people and that we're not harming people. So I did my yoga teacher training, it seems like many, many moons ago now, but over 5 years ago. And during that, I did it over 3 months. There's so many different ways. You can do like a month intensive, or you can do it over a year. So mine was 3 months, and I did every weekend bar one a month. I did this while I was also working in Hackney as a secondary school teacher. So it was quite an intense time. And there's so much that you're learning. Learning. And then you have to spew it back out, do your exams, all of that. So it felt a lot like my brain was going to explode. It was new knowledge, ideas going in, concepts, philosophy, safety of yoga practice, and this new language called Sanskrit. So I use bits and bobs of Sanskrit in my teaching. Some teachers will use heaps of it. It's just each teacher's style. I like to be a bit more accessible for perhaps somebody who hasn't been practicing yoga that long. So I'll, drip feed a few bits in, but I'm not using heaps of it because a lot of people don't really understand what it means. Everything had either had a place or it didn't really when I was doing yoga teacher training. And the philosophy side of it really just felt like really foreign, and it bounced off my brain. And I kind of like put those sort of blinders on, and I didn't really spend too much time with philosophy. I learned it enough to kind of take it in and to make me a well-rounded teacher. But I didn't really spend too much time on it since. On the other hand, the anatomy stuff really, really stuck with me. And if you've taken classes of mine, you'll see that I'm really anatomy focused, and I'm probably not talking about philosophy as much. Where you might have a teacher who talks heaps about philosophy, but then won't really talk too much about the anatomy. Neither's right, neither's wrong. They're just different styles of teaching. And then different styles of students will be attracted to those different styles of teaching as well. So the philosophy side, I found it less concrete and harder to absorb and harder to contextualize. It was very story-based, quite creative, and I just wanted really tangible things. I think I was at a real whirlwind point in my life. I was moving to Margate, I was opening a yoga studio. So I just needed something that I could sink my teeth into and be like, yes, this is black and white, this is right and wrong, and go from there. So 4.5, 5 years later, I'm now coming full circle, and I'm looking at philosophy again. I wouldn't say in the same way that I did when I was in yoga teacher training, because it is so different. But it is something that I'm coming back to, and that's sort of making more sense to me. So if you're wondering where some of this yoga philosophy comes from, it comes from something called the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali. When I got this text, I remember I took the books for my yoga teacher training on a holiday to Greece, and I started reading them, and it was just like gobbledygook. I literally couldn't understand it, and I felt really, really lost. So Patanjali and the sutras came about in approximately, they don't really know, 400 CE. So many moons ago. The life that was happening when the sutras were written and the life that is happening now are, they're night and day. They're totally different. But I think what's really nice is when you break these down, you can really start to sift through and find things that you can now contextualize in your own life. So these sutras disappeared for a really long time, but they resurfaced in the 19th century, and they essentially make up the backbone of Ashtanga yoga practice. So if you're an Ashtangi, if you go to lots of Ashtanga classes, it wouldn't be too bizarre to have a yoga teacher base their class on a sutra. Okay, and they're kind of like these little rules and things to live by for yoga. So yeah, the sutras are the guidelines for yoga off and on the mat, okay? And we sometimes don't think about our yoga practice being something beyond the studio, beyond when we're on our mat. So the yamas are the don'ts, and the niyamas are the do's, okay? So pretty simple. Let's break them apart. You will know some of these, okay? So one of the niyamas, so the to-dos, is asana, and that is your yoga physical practice, okay? The physical postures of yoga. And you might have heard of something called pranayama. That's the breathing practice, okay? So these are breathing techniques, but some of the other ones you may not have heard of unless you've perhaps studied yoga or philosophy of yoga. So I'm going to be breaking down some of these, but in a way that's accessible for our modern life and maybe even for our COVID life. So when I started to get back into philosophy, I read this book called Greed, Sex and Intention, Living Like a Yogi in the 21st Century. I loved the title because it had the word sex in it. It didn't sound boring, and it really wasn't. It completely and utterly transfixed me. I read it so fast, and I've read it quite a few times because to me, it takes the sutras, which were really inaccessible for my brain, and contextualize them and makes it kind of, okay, this is what I need to do, and this is what I'm going to take from what I've learned. So I found that it was real, it was honest, it didn't like tip its toe into yoga philosophy the way that I've sometimes read, and it contextualized it in a way that I could read and understand and then put into practice. So we're going to be looking at Ahimsa, which is non-harming, non-violence. So you probably think, that, and I'd hope, that you're living by this yama. And so things like don't punch, don't bite, don't kick. These are all things we learn, in our most primal state when we're like toddlers and we don't know how to sort of express ourselves. We've got all this stuff going on, so we just express ourselves physically, and that's often, in a physical way that can sometimes be slightly violent. Maybe we don't mean to hurt, but that's the only way we know how to express ourselves. But this yama is far more than just physical violence, okay? So I want to start with your yoga practice, okay? So how can you be non-harming in your yoga practice? So can you remember a time that you maybe pushed yourself too hard? Maybe you pulled a muscle, maybe you winded or hurt yourself, maybe you have an injury that stayed with you for a long time. I'm especially speaking to my yogis who've been practicing for a long time and to my yoga teachers. Okay, we want to get that posture, we want to nail that pose, and we're going to push, 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 not listening to all the teachings that we've learned, and we get an injury. Okay, what about other sports? How many sports or runs have you gone for and you know that you probably should take a break and you just don't? So thinking about how often does the ego get in the way of something we kind of know that we're not really ready to do. So that's a big one. Just like for a moment, think about that. Like how often are you thinking, I'm not going to harm myself? Okay. And does this style of practice, when you're really pushing and you're not listening, does this go against that yama, ahimsa? So truly listening to our bodies and taking the time to warm up properly, to build strength, rather than just chucking ourselves into our practice to feel accomplished, we would be harming ourselves if we did this all the time. A perfect example of this is myself. So I have a rotator cuff injury that I've been dealing now with for almost over 3 years. I got obsessed with Pincha Muryanasana, getting that forearm balance, so balancing on my forearms. And I kept pushing myself and kept pushing myself, and I knew that my shoulder was acting up, but I kept getting closer to the pose. So I just kind of go through the pain, and now I've got this shoulder injury that's, stayed with me. If you've seen recently my cupping marks, that's for my shoulder that's still injured. So I want you to think about, can we let go of the ego and start to practice for ourselves only? Okay, so no one else, no mirrors, no cameras, nothing like that. So modifying when we need to, this means using blocks, using props, maybe missing a pose entirely, taking breaks when we need to, and building the proper strength we need before attempting these gravity-defying poses, okay? So not just in yoga, but like all kind of sports, gymnastics, dance, all of those things. So think about that. How can you improve that? And not end up like me. So not end up with a rotator cuff injury, not end up with something that's going to stay with you for a really long time. So I now have changed the way I teach yoga. I really look and teach with these modifications, because sometimes when students are practicing, they don't know that there's another way. They don't know there's another way to practice. So I have a strict eye on my students, and I try to understand what's available to them. And a lot of this has to do with anatomy. A lot of this has to do with understanding hamstrings and tightness in shoulders and tightness on the anterior and posterior side. So I study injuries. I study these ideas of rehab and modifications. And I don't know if I ever would have been kind of a teacher that went down that path so intensely if it hadn't been for my own injury. So now I'm like practicing Ahimsa as much as I can in my own practice. Binds are pretty much out of the question for me. So, you know, I use a strap, or I just don't go for the bind. And, you know, maybe one day I'll get them back, maybe I won't. So I want to make sure that all students are progressing and feeling like they're progressing, but not harming themselves to do that, because I learned Ahimsa the hard way. So let's move away from the physical yoga practice and let's think about the little voice in your head. Guaranteed, all of us are being harming in the way that we think about ourselves and the way that we talk to ourselves. So the little voice in our head always has an opinion, okay? It can make you do the weirdest things, redo your hair 20 times, change your outfits, cancel plans, and just stay home. So this voice is just really, really controlling and therefore harming your social life, your emotional well-being. So I know that that voice in my head can say some seriously messed up stuff about me. And I really believe that if, you know, other people could hear some of the things that that voice is saying to me, that, you know, my cheeks would go quite red. So the words of my self-critic, you know, they don't follow the yama Ahimsa. And you can get this comparison. I talk a lot about it, imposter syndrome, but you know, you'll never get that position because you're lazy and you don't deserve friends and all of this really horrible stuff. Okay. It is this self-sabotage behavior. So if you're self-sabotaging and if you're hurting, you know, yourself here, then you're not practicing Ahimsa. So, and this is all compounded with social media. Okay. You know, if you've watched The Social Dilemma, you're going to see that, you know, the suicide rates for teens is just skyrocketing since the invention of social media. So all of this leads to this Ahimsa self-harming. So get some locks on your phone, have a timer, put your phone away. Like all of these things are super duper duper important. So, you know, social media is just giving us a constant barrage of all these perfect things. In Sanskrit, this voice that imprints on us is samaskaras, and this can inform the way we think and behave. So part of practicing Ahimsa is noting these thoughts, the voice, and taking action to change them. So yoga stands for Yoga Chuti Vrita Nirodha. And this is the calming the voices of the mind. So just modifications of the mind. And this is yoga. So this is Ahimsa. A lot of these kind of intertwine, which is really nice. So yoga is really owning your own bullshit, guys. That's what it is. It's knowing what the voices are, saying, I'm not going to listen to you today, and moving on from it. So one of the ways I started battling this negative voice is with a gratitude journal. I've talked about it a lot. So I'm a naturally negative person. I've always been this, and the glass is always half empty. I wanted to change this. I don't enjoy this part of my personality. It isn't something that I love. I wish I was just like sunshine and roses all the time, but it's me, okay? And at the time I was working with Pandora, and she said, right, you're going to sit down every night and you're going to do a gratitude journal. You're going to write down 20 things that you're grateful for. And oh my God, 20 things. It was impossible. I was writing the most mundane things ever. But over time, 20 became a lot easier. And it wasn't because all of a sudden my life had become, you know, perfect. It was because I switched my mindset and I became less harming, looking for negative, and I started looking for positive things. And now I can get 30 things quite easily. And that's just because I'm living my life now, like tuning in to what's good. So when something good happens, we take note of our head and we remind ourselves, and we can write it then in our journal. So we really start to change the impressions in our brain. We should start our days with intentions. So just a way to carry on our day, our practice, whatever it is that you want to do. And if the intention is to help or to heal or to aid, then this is also Ahimsa. And it doesn't have to be, the whole world. It could be helping your kids. It could be taking your dog for a walk. It could be, dropping some food off to a local charity. If the intention is something else, and this is where you really need to look inside, okay? Is the intention to make someone feel jealous? Is it to lie? Is it to belittle? Even if it's not intended that way, but we are doing that, we need to be able to notice and know that we're doing, we are causing some harm and work on changing that. So we can also go as far as also examining our diet. So non-harming, looking at the bigger picture. I mean, guys, this is a massive conversation right now. Have you watched the new David Attenborough documentary? So our world, how are we harming our world? And this can be really overwhelming. I know that it is for me sometimes. I watched the David Attenborough preview the other day and burst into tears. Because, sometimes it can all be overwhelming, but I just want you to think every little tiny thing that you can do can help and can help you live a more of an Ahimsa life. So thinking about our environment, there are different options with how we eat. You can be vegetarian, you can be vegan, you can eat only organic, you can eat in season, you can avoid single-use plastics. These are all different ways to practice Ahimsa. Now, if you decided to do all of these at once, it might be really overwhelming and your chance of failure and feeling guilty is much higher. So it will be very difficult to get a group of people together who all agree on one way of eating is the best way. So don't worry about what anyone else is doing. Look at what works best for you and go with that. Perhaps just start to think about where Ahimsa comes into play and, diet could be the first step. So it can be small things, really, really small things. Maybe you'll still eat meat, but you'll only purchase grass-fed beef, okay? Maybe you can't afford organic all the time, but maybe you're going to start a vegetable garden, or maybe even on your windowsill, you're going to grow some herbs. We don't have to be 100% perfect all the time. So little things that I've changed. I am by no means a vegan, but I am aware of those small changes making a big difference. So I don't drink dairy milk anymore. I've tried all the different milks, but I'm an oat milk lover. I also love that oat milk, in terms of the other plant-based options, doesn't use as much land or as much water. So that's good. I'm almost on a no meat diet. I'll have it every once in a while, try to get it, from a farm, but really it's quite limited. Eat some fish, but I love vegetarian food. My crux, my kind of thing that's really difficult for me to get rid of is cheese. But again, there's lots of good vegan options as well. And, this all comes back to this idea of intention, okay? So what is your intention with how you eat, with how you live, with how you love, all of these things, and just making these small changes to make sure that you are living a life with Ahimsa. Start small. Don't overwhelm yourself. So make more intentional choices about the foods you eat and where you get your food, and make these decisions make you happy, not guilty. Okay, it is not a diet. I'm not telling you to cut your calories where, if you even have like a sniff of a chocolate chip, you're going to feel guilty. This is not what it's about. It's about making decisions that make you feel good. And when I switched that in my brain and I was like, actually, I do feel good when I'm not going to the shop and buying, bleached meat on a shelf. That makes me feel good. I'm not going to make anybody else feel guilty about it, but it makes me feel good. So yeah, my biggest challenge is going to be cutting out dairy. I'd love also to get a chicken, not to eat the chicken, but to have eggs. I just don't know how to get a chicken in Hudson to get along. If any of you have a chicken and a dog, I'd love to hear how you make this work. Maybe Hudson and the chicken can make friends. So the biggest thing that I want you to take away from this, so Ahimsa, non-harming, non-violence, okay, we talked about your yoga practice and other sporting practice. We talked about that voice in your head, the way that we speak to ourselves, the way we kind of negotiate social media, our diet, is your heat on all the time, the environment, all of these things that can help you live more of a Ahimsic life. But yeah, it's about balance, okay? You don't have to totally kill yourself. You don't have to be devoid of any happiness or any kind of luxuries, but just think about the things you're doing on a daily basis. So see if you can just make one small change this week. And I'd love you in the comments to just tell me, and it can be post, you can watch the video later, but tell me one small thing that you've changed, maybe in the past, maybe something that you're going to take on now. maybe it's like a big goal, like something by the end of the year. You've got less than 3 months. And see how this makes you feel. See if you can make the decision to make you feel happy, not to feel upset. And then how does it change you on the inside? How does it affect the people around you? So I want you to just simply do your best, okay? Live each thing that you do with a connection to this intention of non-harming myself, other people around me, and, you know, the world as a bigger whole. And living a more yogic life is one that's more switched on. That's what it's about. It's about connecting to yourself, connecting to others, and just feeling like that zing of life. So it's not robotic, and it's not one that aims to be, you know, harmful in any kind of way. So let me know if you've got any questions, but just know that Ahimsa means non-harming, and it doesn't just come down to this physical, I'm not going to punch anybody. It's really about these bigger topics, these bigger ideas. And I hope that made sense. It's one that really, really started to make sense to me. And next week, I'll be back to talk to you about another one of these. Right, guys, have an amazing day, and I will see you later. Bye.